You ever hear a name come over a radio and feel the room get colder? The voice came low and rough through the hiss of encrypted static, almost swallowed by the hum of generators and the endless drone of ventilation fans pushing desert heat through the command tent at Fort Ridgeline. It was just after 0600, the sun barely over the horizon, throwing a copper glare through the canvas seams, when the old man stepped inside. Nobody noticed him at first. Men in fresh uniforms leaned over digital maps glowing green and amber, arguing over flight routes and fuel windows, coffee steaming beside stacks of briefing folders. The air smelled of dust, printer toner, and hot electronics. Then a warning tone chirped from a tactical radio. A brief burst of interference crackled over the command net, sharp enough to make two lieutenants glance up. The old man did not react. He stood near the entrance with one hand resting on a worn leather satchel. His olive field jacket faded almost gray with age, his shoulders narrow but unbowed. His pale blue eyes moved once across the tent, not searching, simply measuring. Captain Ryan Holt noticed him last, and irritation flashed over his face before curiosity took over. Holt was 32, polished, ambitious, every crease in his combat blouse knife-sharp. He walked over with the confidence of a man used to controlling every room he entered. "This is a restricted briefing," he said, voice carrying enough edge to turn heads. "You lost, sir?" The old man said nothing. He only looked at Holt with a stillness that made the younger officer feel, for a moment, oddly transparent. Somewhere behind them a coffee mug tipped, clinking against a table. No one moved to pick it up. Holt gave a dry laugh and turned toward the watching officers, playing to his audience now. "Everybody in this tent carries a call sign," he said. "Pilots, operators, even drone controllers. What about you, old-timer? What do they call you?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Probably Grandpa Six." Even the overhead fans seemed louder in the silence that followed. The old man's hand drifted toward a weathered patch sewn crooked near his jacket. Pocket, fingers brushing thread worn smooth by decades. When he answered, his voice was barely above a murmur, but it landed with the weight of iron. "Titan lead." The words seemed to strike the air and stay there. For 1 second nobody reacted. Then something shifted. A senior chief near the operations table froze, styrofoam cup slipping from his hand, coffee spilling dark across the floor. One lieutenant stopped typing mid-sentence. Another slowly turned from the tactical display, face draining of color. Holt smiled, not understanding. "Titan lead," he repeated mockingly. "Sounds impressive." But beneath the sarcasm, a crack had opened, because at the rear of the tent, where an old analog radio sat patched into the secure net for redundancy, a faint hiss rose again. Then a burst of static so sharp it cut through every voice. The old man's eyes flicked once toward that radio, and for a heartbeat, under the desert wind rattling the canvas walls, he looked not 82 years old, but like a man hearing an old battlefield calling him home. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole Brennan, who had been silent in the corner until now, felt the skin rise on his arms. He knew two things instantly. Captain Holt had stepped onto something he did not understand. And the name Titan Lead was not a joke. It was a ghost. The static died as suddenly as it had come, leaving a silence so complete even the generators outside seemed distant. Captain Ryan Holt forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Interesting story," he said, folding his arms. "Titan Lead. Sounds like something from a Cold War movie." A few nervous laughs surfaced, thinner now, uncertain. But Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole Brennan did not laugh. His stare remained fixed on Elias Mercer, as if trying to pull an old memory out of smoke. The old veteran had not moved. He stood in the same quiet posture, hand resting on the leather satchel, eyes steady under the hard fluorescent light. Then Holt took another step forward, pressing the performance. "All right, old-timer," he said, voice sharpening. "If that is a real call sign, who assigned it?" Mercer answered without haste. "Men who never expected to come home." The words settled over the room with a strange gravity. One young lieutenant shifted his boots against the concrete floor. Another reached toward the secure terminal and stopped, as if suddenly unsure of what he should touch. Brennan felt something tighten in his chest. Tighten lead. He had heard it once before, years ago, whispered over bourbon by a retired aviator who went silent after saying the name. Holt pointed toward Mercer's jacket. That patch. What unit is that supposed to be? The cloth was faded nearly white, the stitching worn into a shape difficult to read. But beneath years of fray a symbol remained, angular and severe. Holt reached toward it with casual arrogance, meaning only to mock. Mercer's hand closed over the patch before Holt's fingers touched it. Not fast, not aggressive, just final. Do not, Mercer said softly. For the first time, Captain Holt looked unsettled. Outside, desert wind snapped the tent flaps, and a gust pushed warm dust through the entrance. Somewhere on the flight line, a turbine spooled up with a rising whine. Then from the rear table came the sound of a chair scraping back. Senior Chief Monroe, the one who had dropped the coffee, stepped closer, face pale. Captain, he said carefully. Permission to check something. Holt frowned. Check what? Monroe glanced at Mercer before answering. An old call sign archive. Holt gave an impatient wave. Knock yourself out. Monroe moved to a hardened terminal, fingers hovering over keys with the caution of a man touching something sacred. Brennan watched the screen reflect green across his weathered face. Search fields opened. Letters appeared. TITAN. Then paused. No one in the tent seemed to breathe. Mercer said nothing. His gaze had drifted toward the old analog radio again, where a faint hiss had returned under the electronic hum. For a moment the command tent seemed less a modern operations center and more a chamber holding its breath over buried history. Holt tried to recover command. You all acting like he is a legend because of a code word? But his voice lacked conviction now. Brennan stepped closer to him and spoke low enough only Holt could hear. Sir, if that archive finds what I think it might, this is already above us. Holt stared at him. What are you talking about? Brennan did not answer, because Monroe had frozen at the terminal. His hand slowly lifted off the keyboard. On the screen, red clearance prompts began populating one after another, lines of restricted access neither lieutenant nor captain should have triggered. Then a secure indicator flashed. Priority routing engaged. Somewhere beyond the tent, in a building neither visible nor nearby, an alert had just gone active. And Captain Ryan Holt, for the first time that morning, began to understand he was no longer controlling the room. No one spoke when the secure indicator began pulsing red. It flashed in measured intervals, cold and deliberate, washing the operations table in a warning glow that seemed too severe for a simple archive query. Senior Chief Monroe leaned back from the terminal as though the machine had become dangerous. Captain Ryan Holt moved toward the screen, jaw tight. What did you do? He demanded. Monroe swallowed once before answering. I entered the call sign. Holt looked at the monitor, but the text rolling down the black field made no sense to him. Layers of clearance notices. Legacy compartment warnings. Operational references decades old. And then one phrase, centered in austere white letters. Active recognition protocol initiated. Holt stared. That is impossible. But Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole Brennan was no longer watching the screen. His attention had shifted to Elias Mercer. The old veteran had closed his eyes for the briefest moment, as if hearing something no one else could hear. The hiss of the analog radio rose again, and with it came a faint smell of hot dust from the flight line. For Mercer, the sound folded into memory, not as a sudden flash but as a slow opening door. He was 23 again beneath a bruised dusk sky, headset pressed tight, a command channel alive with clipped voices and failing signals. A younger voice calling him Titan lead. The smell of aviation fuel. The tremor of metal under gloved hands. Then the memory drifted back into the present, leaving only the old man standing motionless beside a tactical map. No younger officer in the tent could fully read. Holt turned to Mercer, forcing authority back into his tone. Who are you? Mercer opened his eyes. A man who answered when called. Before Holt could speak again, the secure radio on Monroe's station crackled to life. Not static this time. A voice. Sharp. Formal. Fort Ridgeline Command Tent. Authenticate priority routing. Every face in the room lifted. Monroe fumbled for the handset. Brennan took it first. This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Brennan. A pause. Then the voice returned, colder now. Hold position. Flag command has been notified. Holt's face lost color. Flag command. Brennan did not answer, because outside, over the hard-packed gravel, came the distant growl of engines. More than one vehicle, approaching fast. Several lieutenants moved toward the tent opening. Through the flap they saw black staff vehicles crossing the motor pool in a plume of pale dust. No scheduled arrivals. No advance notice. The room changed in that instant. What had begun as mockery now carried the electric weight of consequence. Holt looked again at Mercer's weathered patch. "What was Titan lead?" he asked, quieter this time. Mercer's eyes held his for a long second. "A promise some men kept." Then he looked toward Brennan. "The Admiral still flies?" Brennan blinked, stunned by the question. "Admiral Reeves?" Mercer gave a faint nod. "He used to hate crosswinds." Brennan felt a chill move through him. There was no public record of that. None he knew. Holt stepped back as though the floor had shifted beneath him. Outside, brakes hissed. Doors opened. Boots struck gravel in disciplined rhythm. But before anyone entered, the analog radio emitted one final burst. Then a voice older than the first, carrying a tremor no machine could hide. "Confirm for command." "Did he say Titan lead?" Brennan lifted the handset slowly. "Yes, sir." Silence answered. Long enough to become its own revelation. Then the reply came almost whispered. "God help us. He is alive." And in the stunned stillness that followed, Captain Ryan Holt understood the room had stopped belonging to rank the moment that old man crossed the threshold. The gravel outside snapped under synchronized boots, each footfall measured, deliberate, too disciplined to belong to ordinary base traffic. No one inside the command tent moved. Even the younger lieutenants who had drifted toward the entrance now stood rigid, as though instinct had warned them something larger than protocol was arriving. Captain Ryan Holt felt sweat gathering under his collar despite the dry morning air. Through the canvas flap, black staff vehicles sat idling, heat rippling above their hoods. Then a figure stepped into the doorway. Not Admiral Nathan Reeves. His aide. A Navy commander with silver at his temples and a face gone strangely pale. He entered without asking permission and stopped the instant he saw Elias Mercer. For a moment he simply stared. Then his right hand rose halfway toward a salute before he caught himself, as if the gesture had escaped on instinct. Holt noticed it. So did everyone else. The commander looked to Brennan. "Who initiated recognition?" Brennan answered quietly. "The call sign did." The commander gave a single stunned nod and reached for the secure handset. "Flag convoy is 30 seconds out." 30 seconds. The phrase landed like a countdown. Holt opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in his career, words abandoned him. Mercer alone seemed untouched by urgency. He had shifted slightly toward the old analog radio, listening to its low hiss the way other men might listen to wind in pine trees. His thumb traced the edge of the worn leather satchel. The motion stirred another memory. A moonless airstrip. Fuel drums glinting silver. A younger Nathan Reeves, not yet an admiral, standing uncertain beside a transport bird, trying to hide fear beneath rank. "What if we do not make it back?" Reeves had asked. Mercer, younger then, fastening a headset, had answered without looking up. "Then fly straight anyway." The memory faded with the scent of jet fuel still ghosting at the edges of his mind. Outside, another engine cut off. Silence followed. Heavy, unnatural silence. Then Admiral Nathan Reeves entered. No one announced him. No aide called the room to attention. Yet every spine straightened. Reeves moved slower than Holt. Expected, broad-shouldered despite age. Ribbons bright against desert camouflage. The gravity of command around him like weather. But it was his face that froze the room. The color had drained from it. He looked not angry, not stern. Shocked. deeply, almost personally shaken. His eyes locked on Mercer and did not leave him. Holt felt his own breath stop. This was the moment his title had promised and even he had not believed possible. Reeves took one step forward. Then another. The officers in the room instinctively moved aside. Nobody had ordered them. The Admiral came within a few feet of Mercer and simply stared, as though confirming a ghost had flesh. His lips parted once before words came. "They told me you were gone." Mercer looked at him with the faintest trace of weary amusement. "People say many things when paperwork fails." A nervous sound escaped one lieutenant that might have been a laugh if fear had not strangled it. Reeves lowered his head for one long second, not in defeat, but in something far rarer in men of rank. Reverence. Captain Holt saw it and felt his stomach drop. Everything he thought he understood about power had shifted. Then Reeves lifted his eyes and asked, voice roughened by memory, "Do you still carry the frequency?" Mercer tapped the satchel. "Always." The Admiral exhaled as if struck. Around them the command tent had become utterly still, canvas walls breathing softly in desert wind, radios quiet, screens forgotten. And every person present understood they were no longer watching an old veteran defend his dignity. They were witnessing history step back into the room. No one in the command tent seemed willing to move after Admiral Nathan Reeves spoke those words. The air itself felt altered, as if the desert heat outside had stopped at the canvas walls and left only the hush of old memory breathing through the room. Reeves took another slow step toward Elias Mercer, his gaze dropping to the worn leather satchel. "I have not seen that bag in 40 years, he said, almost to himself. Mercer's hand rested over the flap. "It still carries what it always did." Captain Ryan Holt watched the exchange as though witnessing a language no academy had taught him. He had expected a reprimand, perhaps some ceremonial recognition. What stood before him was stranger, personal, ancient. Reeves extended a hand, not to shake Mercer's, but toward the satchel. Mercer opened it without a word. Inside, beneath folded paper charts browned by age, lay a compact field radio crystal sealed in scratched brass, no larger than a silver dollar. Several younger officers leaned forward instinctively. It looked ordinary, even crude. Yet Admiral Reeves went visibly still at the sight of it. His jaw tightened. "I thought that frequency died with the operation." Mercer answered, "It never died. It went quiet." The phrase stirred something in Reeves so deep it passed across his face before command could hide it. For a moment he was not the theater admiral whose name traveled with carriers and strike groups. He was the young lieutenant from Mercer's memory, standing under dim runway lights with doubt in his eyes. The old analog radio hissed again, and Mercer's fingers brushed the brass crystal. The room dissolved in his mind. A night sea under moonless cloud, instrument lights faint as fireflies, a cockpit vibrating with crosswind. Reeves beside him, younger, white-knuckled over controls, and Mercer's voice over headset saying, steady as iron, "Follow the signal, not the storm." The memory withdrew. In the present, Admiral Reeves exhaled through a slow breath. "Do they know?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the younger officers. "What you prevented?" Mercer looked around the tent, at screens pulsing data, polished boots and fresh rank. "No," he said, "and perhaps that is mercy." Holt felt a strange shame rise in him, though no accusation had been spoken. He heard himself ask, almost involuntarily, "Prevented what, sir?" Reeves turned. For the first time, he addressed Holt not as a superior correcting a junior, but as a witness being entrusted. "There was a night," he said, "when an entire battle group nearly vanished because one signal was mistaken for another." He looked back to Mercer. He heard what none of us heard. No embellishment, no grand heroic recital. Yet every word landed heavier than metals. "Master." Gunnery Sergeant Brennan lowered his head a fraction, as if honoring a truth too large for speech. Then came the second turn no one expected. Reeves stepped back and, before anyone understood what was happening, removed his command gloves and placed them on the briefing table. a gesture so deliberate even the youngest lieutenant sensed ritual in it. He faced Mercer fully. "Sir," he said, voice rough with restrained emotion, "I owe you a report long overdue." Captain Holt felt his pulse hammer. An admiral calling this quiet old man sir. The room absorbed it in stunned silence. Mercer studied Reeves for a long moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Then give it." Outside, wind pushed against the canvas in a low rolling sound like distant surf. Inside, officers who hours earlier might have laughed at a forgotten veteran now stood as though in chapel. Reeves reached for the secure handset and spoke into the line with a tone none there had ever heard from him. "Suspend the morning exercise. Clear the command channel. Titan protocol is active." At the words, several operators froze. Holt's eyes widened. Because he had read contingency manuals all his career, Titan protocol was not ceremonial. It was reserved for command emergencies and buried legacy authority. And somehow, impossibly, an old man with a weathered satchel had just awakened it. The words Titan protocol is active seemed to alter the physics of the room. Operators who moments before had been hovering over routine mission schedules now moved with stunned caution, as though afraid even keystrokes might carry consequence. One communications lieutenant removed his headset entirely, staring at Admiral Nathan Reeves as if waiting for him to retract the order. He did not. Reeves stood unmoving beside Elias Mercer, one hand resting on the briefing table, the other near the secure handset. His expression transformed from shock into something colder and more formal. Old duty. Old debt. Captain Ryan Holt felt it before he understood it. Whatever had awakened in this tent had outranked his certainty. The tactical displays shifted as operators cleared channels and suspended exercise traffic. One by one, green routing. Indicators dimmed. A broad digital map of the Pacific Theater dissolved into a black field stamped with a legacy command seal no one under 50 in the room had ever seen in live use. Even Brennan took a breath at that. "I thought that protocol was retired," he murmured. Reeves answered without looking away from Mercer. "Some things are not retired. Only sleeping." Mercer gave the faintest nod, as if confirming an old principle. Then the analog radio, silent for several long moments, emitted a low pulse unlike ordinary static. Mercer turned his head instantly. "That tone," he said softly, "is wrong." The younger officers exchanged confused glances. Holt frowned. "It is only interference." Mercer looked at him. "No, it is phase drift." He stepped toward the radio for the first time since arriving. The movement alone drew every eye. He set the satchel down, opened it again, and withdrew not a weapon, not some classified document, but a folded frequency card laminated by age. Corners curled. Ink faded. Yet he handled it as a surgeon might handle living tissue. Reeves watched with open tension. "You still read analog drift by ear?" Mercer did not answer. He leaned closer to the radio, listening. Canvas snapped outside in a hard gust. The room seemed suspended on that hiss. Then Mercer adjusted a tuning wheel with 2 fingers. A faint oscillation vanished. Clean signal replaced it. Several communications specialists stared in disbelief. One whispered, "That should not have worked." Brennan almost smiled. "That is because you were taught software." He was taught weather. Holt felt his face warm with humiliation, but deeper than embarrassment was awe. The old veteran had corrected a signal fault none of them had noticed, in a system they barely knew existed. Reeves looked at Mercer with something like old gratitude resurfacing. "Still hearing storms before they form." Mercer replied, "Someone has to." Then the secure line chirped. "Incoming from Fleet Command." A senior voice requested authentication under Titan authority. Reeves reached for the handset, but Mercer raised a hand. The Admiral stopped. Even that gesture shook Holt. Mercer spoke a sequence of numbers and phonetic words so old several operators began frantically searching obsolete code references. The reply came instantly. Authentication accepted. Priority honors acknowledged. In the silence that followed, one young lieutenant whispered the question everyone feared to ask. "Who has that level of recognition?" Reeves answered in a voice almost reverent. Men who were never supposed to exist on paper. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Then came the second escalation. A courier rushed through the tent flap carrying a sealed dispatch tube, breathless, boots dusted white. He halted, seeing Mercer, and almost forgot why he had come. "Sir, Pentagon Watch has requested visual confirmation." Reeves took the dispatch, opened it, scanned the page, and slowly looked up. His expression changed again. Not shock this time. Decision. "They are sending a secure airlift." Holt stared. "For him?" Reeves looked at him sharply. "For all of us." No one understood. Not fully. But Mercer did. He turned toward the rising sun bleeding through the canvas seams and said, almost to himself, "Then they remember what happened over the strait." Brennan heard it and felt a chill, because for the first time he realized this was no longer a story about a forgotten veteran being recognized. It was becoming the reopening of something history had tried very hard to bury. The phrase "over the strait" lingered in the room like a coded warning none of the younger officers could decipher. Captain Ryan Holt felt every instinct urging him to ask what had happened there. But the question died unspoken as a deep mechanical tremor rolled faintly through the canvas walls. At first it seemed distant thunder. Then Brennan tilted his head and knew. Rotor wash. Heavy transport. Coming fast. Several men moved to the tent opening. Beyond the flight line, through rising heat shimmer, a dark military helicopter descended toward the restricted pad, its rotors beating the morning air into waves of dust. No one had ordered a visible response, yet personnel across the tarmac were already freezing in place, turning toward the arrival. Admiral Nathan Reeves watched without surprise. "They moved quicker than I expected," he said. Mercer answered, "Fear has always traveled faster than orders." Holt looked at him sharply. "Fear of what?" Mercer studied the digital map gone dark behind him. "Of repeating an old mistake." Before Holt could press further, the secure line sounded again. Reeves lifted the handset, listened, then handed it not to Brennan, not to a command aide, but to Mercer. Every eye widened. Mercer took the receiver with the calm of a man accepting something long familiar. For a few seconds nobody heard the voice on the other end, only Mercer's side of the exchange. "Yes, I still have it." Pause. "No, the crystal was never surrendered." Another pause, longer. Then Mercer's face changed almost imperceptibly. A shadow of old sorrow passing through weathered composure. "I understand," he said softly. "Then today we closed the ledger." He returned the handset. Reeves looked shaken again. "They are authorizing release?" Mercer nodded once. "For witnesses." Brennan drew breath. "Release of what?" Holt could not stop himself. "Sir, with respect, what are we standing in the middle of?" Reeves turned slowly toward the younger officers gathered around the silent operations table. His voice carried not theatrics but burden. 42 years ago, a signal confusion nearly triggered catastrophe in contested waters. It did not happen because one man heard a false command hidden in static. He glanced toward Mercer and disobeyed protocol to stop it. The younger officers stared as if history itself had leaned through the tent wall. Holt felt his earlier mockery burn inside him. Yet Mercer only looked mildly tired. "Protocol was wrong," he said. "Signal was lying." Then from outside came another unexpected shift. A runner entered breathless from the flight line. "Sir, the helicopter crew is requesting full honors formation." Holt blinked. Full honors was for visiting heads of state, medal ceremonies, fallen commanders. Reeves did not hesitate. "Granted." The runner left. Through the opening, officers could now be seen lining the pad in spontaneous rows. No order broadcast. It was spreading by word of mouth, by recognition. Brennan let out a low breath. "I have served 26 years and never seen respect move this fast." Mercer gave a faint smile. "It is not moving toward me." He looked toward the landing pad. "It is moving toward memory." Then Reeves did something none present would forget. He reached up and removed the 4-star insignia cover from his own patrol cap. a gesture so intimate and strange it froze the room. He set it on the table beside the brass frequency crystal. "There was a debt from the strait," he said. "Today I pay it." Captain Holt felt something inside him break open, some hard polished certainty stripped away. Outside, rotor wash hammered the gravel. Dust spiraled through sunlight like smoke made of gold. The transport settled, side door opening, and as figures emerged through the swirling haze, Brennan narrowed his eyes and whispered words that sent a chill through everyone near enough to hear. "Those are not escorts." Holt followed his gaze. Dark uniforms, senior flags, men far too high in rank to travel for ceremony alone. Mercer saw them too, and for the first time since entering the tent, his expression grew solemn. Because whatever had begun as recognition was now becoming judgment. The figures coming through the dust were older than Holt expected, and far more unsettling. Not ceremonial visitors, not inspectors, men whose faces lived in briefing binders and secure channels, arriving unannounced beneath spinning rotors as if summoned by a forgotten alarm. A 4-star Air Force general stepped off first, then a Marine commandant, and behind them a civilian in dark overcoat whose presence carried the quiet gravity of intelligence authority. Yet none of them moved to Admiral Nathan Reeves, their eyes fixed on Elias Mercer. Along the pad, officers who had formed in improvised honor rose straightened further, boots planted in gravel, faces taut with disbelief. The rotor wash faded. Silence returned. And into that silence the Air Force general approached Mercer until only a few feet separated them. Captain Ryan Holt held his breath, expecting a salute, perhaps some formal recognition long delayed. Instead the general stopped and spoke words that seemed to strike even Reeves. "Sir, we believed you. Died preserving the Strait Channel." The old veteran's expression did not change. "It was easier for some men if I had." The answer landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. The civilian official stepped forward next, studying Mercer with the careful intensity of a man reading a classified file made flesh. "There is a sealed report requiring your witness." Mercer looked almost amused. "After 42 years?" The official answered, "After 42 years, truth finally outranked convenience." Brennan felt the words in his chest. Judgment indeed. But then came the reversal none had foreseen. Admiral Reeves, who had stood in visible reverence all morning, suddenly moved one pace aside, yielding central position to Mercer before every rank assembled. Yielding it, Holt felt his pulse stumble. In military culture, gestures spoke louder than proclamations. This one thundered. Mercer looked toward the assembled dignitaries and then, unexpectedly, toward Captain Holt. The young officer felt exposed under those pale blue eyes. Mercer asked him, almost gently, "Captain, when you demanded a call sign this morning, what did you expect?" Holt struggled to answer. "A joke, sir." Mercer gave a faint nod. "And what did you find?" The words caught in Holt's throat. At last he said, barely above a whisper, "Something larger than rank." For the first time, Mercer smiled. Small, weathered, human. Then the Air Force general removed a folded document from a leather portfolio and extended it. Reeves glanced at it and visibly paled again, more deeply than before. Holt saw it and understood at last the meaning of the title fate had written hours earlier. Not fear, recognition. The general spoke so all could hear. "This order rescinds the sealed casualty classification attached to Titan Lead and restores operational honor under living authority." Several officers looked stunned. Living authority. A phrase from another era. Mercer did not take the document. Instead he asked one question. "And the lieutenant blamed at the strait?" Reeves answered before anyone else could. "His name was cleared this morning." For a moment no one moved. Mercer lowered his eyes. Some old burden seemed to loosen from his shoulders. Then, in a gesture that left even senior commanders speechless, he picked up the brass frequency crystal from the briefing table and placed it into Captain Holt's hand. The young officer stared as though holding fire. "Sir, I cannot." Mercer closed Holt's fingers over it. "You can, because arrogance learns slower than humility, but it can still learn." Brennan nearly laughed in astonished admiration. Outside, sunlight struck the crystal through tent seams and threw a pale flash across Holt's knuckles. The room had reached its summit, or so everyone thought. Then the civilian official spoke once more. "There is one final matter, Mr. Mercer." His tone changed, softer. "The President has approved posthumous review for the unit behind Titan Lead." Mercer looked up sharply. "Posthumous?" The official met his eyes. "Sir, you were the only one who came home." The command tent went utterly still. No wind, no radio hiss, even memory seemed to pause. And in that silence, all present understood the old man had not merely returned to reclaim forgotten honor. He had carried an entire lost brotherhood back with him. For several long seconds, no one in the command tent moved after those words. "You were the only one who came home." The sentence seemed to settle over the room like dust after rotor wash, soft and heavy and impossible to escape. Captain Ryan Holt looked at Elias Mercer and for the first time did not see a legend, or a mystery, or even an old veteran wronged by arrogance. He saw a man who had carried silence longer than most men carry memory. Mercer stood very still, his weathered hand resting lightly against the briefing table, pale morning light tracing the worn lines in his face. Admiral Nathan Reeves lowered his eyes, and even the senior commanders who had arrived with such authority seemed suddenly diminished before something far older than rank. The civilian official gently closed the portfolio in his hands. "Their names will be restored," he said. "All of them." Mercer nodded once, but his gaze had drifted toward the open tent flap where the desert wind moved the edges of the canvas in slow breaths. "They were never lost to me," he said. Quietly, no one answered. None could improve the truth of it. Then, in a motion so simple it carried more force than ceremony, Admiral Reeves stepped back and raised his hand in salute. Not the sharp, mechanical salute of parade grounds. A slow, deliberate offering of respect. The Air Force general followed. Then the Marine commandant. Then Brennan. One by one, as though drawn by an old instinct older than protocol. Every officer in the tent came to attention and saluted the old man who had entered that morning as an object of ridicule. Captain Holt stood last. His hand trembled slightly as he brought it up. Mercer looked at him, not with triumph, but with a kindness Holt knew he had not earned. After a long moment, Mercer returned the salute. And in that silence, even the hum of electronics seemed to fall away. Later, the secure airlift waited, but Mercer did not board at once. He asked instead to walk the edge of the flight line. Reeves walked beside him without aides. No photographers, no ceremony. Just two old men moving slowly across gravel bright under the late morning sun. Holt watched from a distance, the brass frequency crystal warm in his palm. Brennan stepped beside him and said, "You know what he gave you?" Holt looked down. "A relic." Brennan shook his head. "A responsibility." Across the tarmac, Mercer paused near the rotor shadow and turned once toward Holt. He lifted two fingers, almost a farewell, almost a command. Then he entered the aircraft. The rotors rose, dust spiraled, and the helicopter lifted into the desert sky until it became only a dark shape against white heat. No one spoke for a long time after it vanished. Weeks later, in the command tent, Holt had the old analog radio restored instead of discarded. Young officers asked why obsolete equipment remained on a modern base. Holt would only touch the brass crystal and say, "Some signals should never be forgotten." And once each year, on the date no manual had ever recorded, Admiral Reeves returned quietly to Fort Ridgeline. No speeches, no audience, just a brief stop at the restored radio console where a small engraved plaque now read, "Titan Lead." He heard the false signal and chose truth. Years later, Holt would tell junior captains about the morning arrogance met memory and lost. He never embellished. He did not need to. He only repeated the lesson Mercer left him with, the words spoken when he closed Holt's hand over the crystal. A call sign was never a name. It was a promise. And among those who heard the story, another saying slowly took root, repeated in low voices wherever service still honored silence. Respect is not demanded. It is recognized, usually too late, unless wisdom arrives in time.